Now I taught the weeping willow how to cry, and I showed the clouds how to cover up a clear blue sky.
Okay, I want to talk about Johnny Cash and his involvement in helping me restore Asbury Park, New Jersey. As I talked about earlier, it was 1983 that I was in Griffin, Georgia, with John and June while they were making a movie called Murder in Cayuga County, and I introduced them to what my plans were in Asbury Park, and Johnny eventually sent his accountant down here to check the project out and meet with me, and he eventually agreed to become my partner. And at that time, I submitted a bid to buy the entire beachfront in Asbury Park with Johnny Cash as my partner. And actually, that made news all over the place. And nobody really believed that I knew Johnny Cash. You know, who the hell, you don't know him. So Johnny says, well, if I'm going to be involved with you, I should be seen in Asbury Park. I said, really? That would be great. Next thing I know, I get a call from his sister Reba, and she says, Johnny's flying up from Port Richey, Florida, and he'll meet you at Newark Airport, and gave me the flight. Well, I'm on my way to pick John up, and I get a call. Back then, they didn't have cell phones. I had a regular Bell telephone in my car, and I got a call from my office to say that John had missed a plane and to turn around and come back. He's now flying into LaGuardia, and he'll get into LaGuardia around noontime. So I turned around and went back, and then I had a fellow from my office drive me to LaGuardia, and I met John when he got off the plane, and he said, geez, I'm awful sorry. I hope I didn't screw things up for you. I said, of course not. He said, well, while I'm in the city, he said, I have to go to the dentist for a quick checkup, and I have to meet with the president of Columbia Records, Dick Asher, I believe his name was. So I said, fine. So we get in a limousine and we go to pull up to what they call Black Rock, which was CBS's and Columbia Records' home in New York City, their big office building. And I figure I'm going to wait in the car. And John said, no, come on in. So I go in with him, and he brings me right into Dick Asher's office, and he introduces me, and he tells Dick Asher, he says, I'm involved with Henry. He says, my friend Henry Vaccaro. He says, we're buying this hotel in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and we're restoring it. And Dick Asher says, what hotel? And I told him. He says, geez, he said, my family used to stay in that hotel. He said, well, if you need some other investors, contact me. And I was great. I mean, Johnny brought me in like I was his son, or his brother. I mean, I'm sitting in on these negotiations about a new record contract and with the president, Dick Asher. I mean, that's the kind of guy Johnny Cash was. So now, that evening there was a city council meeting, and I had let the mayor know that Johnny Cash was coming. Well, with the schedule being screwed up, the council meeting back then started at 5:30 at night, and here we're in the city at 5:30. So I called ahead and said we'll be there in about an hour and a half. Well, if anybody knows what it is to try and get out of the rush hour traffic in New York, I mean, we're 2 hours just getting out of the traffic. So again, there's no cell phones or phones in a limousine, and we pulled over at a gas station after we got out of the tunnel, and I called the police department in Asbury Park, which was right next to the city council chambers, and I asked the captain, would he please go next door and tell the mayor that we're on our way, but we're going to be a couple hours late. So I didn't think anybody would be there, so here we pull up in this big Cadillac, and Johnny gets out, and he had on his Andy Jackson boots that were laced up to his knee. He had on his big duster and a cape, and I'm telling you, he looked like the Pope. I mean, when he walked in, they were kneeling down and kissing his ring. I never had such an experience in my whole life. Johnny Cash walked into that council meeting. Everybody stayed, and I'm telling you, it was like something was staged. I mean, we walked in, and instantly I knew everybody's name and made the introduction, and it was just an incredible experience. So now people knew that I knew Johnny Cash. In fact, the mayor got a hold of the Department of Public Works and escorted us after the meeting to show Johnny the convention center and the Paramount Theater, and it was big time. So, I mean, Johnny shows up in Asbury Park. However, around the same time, again, nobody believed that I knew Johnny, so there was a man that had an antique store in town, and it was on a corner of Sewell Avenue and Main Street, just a little store, and he used to have a sign in the window that said, we buy for cash, we sell for cash, used antiques, merchandise, etc. So now he hears about Johnny Cash, he puts his giant sign in the window, but what we really need is Johnny Cash, and we need him now. Well, John and June come to check out the renovations in the hotel one night, and afterwards I'm driving them through town, I'm taking them out to dinner, and I showed them the sign. And June says, why, John, we have to stop in that store. So pull the car over and get out, and thank God I always had a camera with me, and I get a picture of Johnny next to the sign, which says, we need Johnny Cash now. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening, I guess, and the store was closed. And Johnny knocks on the door, and you hear this voice from inside, hey, I'm sorry, but we're closed. Johnny knocks again. Hey, bud, I don't think you understand English. We're closed. Johnny knocks again. You don't fucking understand English, buddy. We are closed. Johnny just goes to his mouth like this and goes through the key, kind of through the keyhole. He says, excuse me, sir. I think by the sign in the, no, I see by the sign in the window you're looking for me. He says, here I am. And this guy let out a scream that you could have heard in Nashville. He let out a scream, and the guy's wife comes running down the stairs from upstairs, and she had a right shoe on her left foot. She tripped coming down. She was so excited. It was incredible. And as it turned out, they became friends of John and June because they were dealing in antiques, although some of them were questionable. But they became very good friends, and I believe the guy's name was Tony Houston. He has since moved out of Asbury, and he lives in, I believe, Poughkeepsie, New York. So, that's just, some of the things about Johnny coming to Asbury Park. It was always an exciting experience. Again, I lose track of time, but these are just little stories as they come to my head. I think they're kind of important. In the early 80s, I get a phone call from Reba, Johnny's sister, and I was on a construction project down in South Jersey, and Reba says, Henry, can we ask a favor of you? I says, of course. And she said that John had just returned from a trip in Europe, and he's not feeling well. June is in London staying with her daughter Carlene, because back then Carlene was doing some off-Broadway shows in London. So June stayed there, and Reba proceeded to tell me that Johnny was in New York in an apartment they had, and he's with John Carter, and Johnny's very sick, and he's got to get to a hospital right away in Nashville. And she says, I have a Learjet coming for him, and the plane's going to be at Teterboro. Is there any way that you could pick John up and get him to the airport, and can John Carter stay with you? I says, absolutely. And that just shows you the trust that they had in me and the friendship we had developed. So I'm way down in South Jersey, and I shot up to New York. It probably took me an hour and a half. I picked John up at his apartment, and he told me he was really sick. He got bitten by a spider, and he developed a staph infection, and they wanted to admit him right away to a hospital in New York, and he said, I'm not going to any hospital in New York, I got to get home. So I drove him over to Teterboro, where I put him on a plane, and John Carter then came back home with me. At the time I was divorced, and John Carter, who was friends with my son Henry, stayed in Short Hills, New Jersey, where my ex-wife was living with my 2 children, and John Carter even went to school with my son Henry. But as I put John on a plane, he flies back to Nashville, and it ends up that he had a bleeding ulcer. And they had to do surgery on Johnny Cash with a staph infection for his bleeding ulcer. And he came out of surgery okay, but instantly he was addicted to prescription medicine again. As a result, when he got better, he was admitted to the Betty Ford Clinic for treatment for his addiction. I was probably the only non-family member that was allowed to go to Betty Ford Clinic to see Johnny Cash. I flew out to Palm Springs, and I actually, on a Sunday morning when it was visiting day, I went to see Johnny Cash in the Betty Ford Clinic, and he was so happy to see me. And he was laughing. He said, because Elizabeth Taylor was over in another part of the clinic. So it was kind of funny. But it just shows you the, the interaction between our families.
Now I taught the weeping willow how to cry, and I showed the clouds how to cover up a